So, in my last video, I teased a little bit about the new plot lines we might see in House of the Dragon Season 3. And an idea I've had kicking around in my head about two of these plot lines in particular, I think warranted their own video. No use waiting around, you've read the title of the video. So, what I've been thinking is that there's a non-zero chance that we might see one or two of the children of Jaehaerys, the Old King, in House of the Dragon Season 3. That is, the generation of Targaryens that came before Viserys, Daemon and Rhaenys. Many book fans colloquially refer to these characters as the Lost Targaryen generation, as none would ever inherit the Iron Throne. Now, Jaehaerys and Alysanne were pretty busy beavers. They had a monumental 13 children together. Although, due to the high infant mortality rate in Westeros, only 10 of these would actually grow into adulthood. And due to many twists of fate, only 2 of them would actually outlive their father when he died in 103 AC. With neither willing or eligible to inherit the crown, it passed to Jaehaerys' grandson, Viserys, during the Great Council at Harrenhal. Even if you haven't read the book, you're probably all familiar with this from the opening scene of the TV show. Well, what you might not know is that author George R.R. Martin actually wanted House of the Dragon to start much earlier than what we see. Speaking in an interview with his publishers at Penguin Random House, he pitched an entirely different pilot episode and potentially an entirely different first season, which would all take place before the council. His idea for the show actually opened up 40 years earlier, and would have starred Jaehaerys' 2 sons, Aemon, the father of Rhaenys, and Baelon, the father of Viserys and Daemon, who had something of a playful rivalry between the two of them. But when Aemon is killed by Myrish pirates in 92 AC, Jaehaerys is forced to choose who to favor with the inheritance, his young granddaughter Rhaenys or his second son Baelon, with the implication that this initial rift is what would ultimately come to grow into the factionalism, which produced the Dance of the Dragons. Now, it's unclear how serious he was about this proposal. George R.R. Martin has had much less involvement in the creative direction of House of the Dragon than he had on any of the early seasons of Game of Thrones. So we don't really know if this was just some idea he came up with on the fly, or if it was actually a serious proposal he made to HBO. In any case, his ideas weren't followed, and the showrunners chose to open the show when they did, with the death of Viserys' first wife, Aemma, and with Rhaenyra being proclaimed heir. Now, to be honest, with all the time jumps going on in Season 1, I think it was probably for the best that they began the show when they did. A major criticism of the season was that, for as good as one set of actors or actresses was, we got to spend too little time with them before the timeline inevitably barreled forward after a few episodes. I mean, we get like 3 pilot episodes this season, and that's too many. But now that I've seen how rushed the show has become in Season 2, and as much as I would have liked to see 2 full seasons for both sets of actresses, I think that this would have run the risk of losing the interest of many viewers, as it would be 2 full seasons of pure political drama before things escalate to outright warfare. Potentially 3 if we gave an entire season to the pre-council plotline. And I mean, Episode 1 is such an excellent pilot for the series. It pretty masterfully introduces all the major characters, at least those who have been born already, while interspersing great moments of practical action scenes and interpersonal drama. I remember going into House of the Dragon with cold feet and coming out hooked after this episode. Even if we did George R.R. Martin's idea and gave 1 or 2 prologue episodes to Aemon and Baelon, this would be a huge gamble, as these episodes might come off as disjointed in a season that's already stuffed to bursting with content. So Aemon and Baelon missed their opportunity for the spotlight on the silver screen, but I don't think that rules out the possibility of seeing other Lost Gen Targaryens in the coming seasons. We actually saw our first one this season, in that scene. You know the one, where Daemon fucks his mom? Yeah, that's actually Alyssa Targaryen, the sister-wife of Prince Baelon and the mother of Daemon and Viserys. In Fire and Blood, she's described as being a lively and adventurous dragon rider. As a child, she had the graceful beauty of the Targaryen like her siblings, but as she aged, she lost these features, developing dirty blonde hair, a crooked nose, big ears, a lopsided smile, and heterochromia. So honestly, she didn't look at all like she does in the TV show. But I guess this is forgivable. She's only in one pretty short scene, and the hair does immediately communicate that she's Targaryen, even if we don't know who she is. But her appearance in the books does fit her personality a lot better. She's a free spirit who does what she wants, fighting with swords, attending tournaments, marrying her brother, and just days after childbirth she took the newborn Viserys, and later Daemon, up on Dragonback to help acclimate them to the skies. Alyssa is a character who had an undeniable lust for life, and as a queen she would have ruled with Baelon in a way that we haven't really seen from any other female character in the series. But unfortunately, she died in childbirth at the age of only 24. Her third son, Aegon, didn't long outlive her. The show seems to suggest that in its timeline, she might have died giving birth to Daemon, since he has no memories of her. At least, I sort of get that impression. But it's not outright clarified. I would say we have a pretty low chance of seeing Alyssa again. Daemon's character arc in Season 2 was pretty poorly received, and I don't know if the writers really want to double dip and give Daemon more hallucinations next season. Her scene this season definitely could have worked with more shock value, but as it's shot, it just comes off as sexually gratuitous. If you aren't convinced that incest can work as a shocking character drama, watch The Northman, or Game of Thrones for that matter. Okay, so that's 1 down, 9 to go. Yikes. Well, like I said before, I think we can safely discount Aemon and Baelon. Like Alyssa, the only way we would see them is through a Daemon flashback, and I don't think the audience is particularly hungry for more of those. I think we can also discount the daughters Daenerys, Maegelle, and Visera. They all died young and were pretty inconsequential. We can also rule out Daella Targaryen, I think. She was the mother of Aemma Arryn, making her Rhaenyra's grandmother, and she was described as being quite frail and slow of mind. She was terrified of marriage and childbirth, but her father forced her into marriage with the Lord of the Vale anyway. Her death, giving birth to Aemma Arryn, led to a severe split between Jaehaerys and Alysanne, as the queen blamed the king for her death. So I don't think we'll see Daella unless we see more of Aemma, and that's somewhat unlikely since it would have to be in one of Daemon or Rhaenyra's flashbacks. I don't really see what bringing her into the story would provide, thematically speaking anyway. Unless we wanted to call back to that conversation between Rhaenyra and her mother from episode 1. If we needed to be reminded that Rhaenyra's 2 maternal ancestors both died in childbirth, it would be sometime in Season 1 when she was having children. The best time for this probably would have been during her miscarriage on Dragonstone, when, depending on accounts, she either fell into labor due to her rage at the crown being usurped, or, more sinisterly, she knowingly induced the miscarriage so that she could be free of the burden of pregnancy, and could more immediately plan the war. This nuance was left out of the TV show, and so too was Daella's chances of being seen or mentioned in House of the Dragon. Okay, and then there were 3. That's not so bad. I would say that these next 3 have at least some chance of being seen in the TV show, but I wouldn't bet on it. I'd give them each maybe a 5 to 25% chance of appearing next season. The first is Gael Targaryen, the final child of Jaehaerys and Alysanne. She was somewhat of a miracle child because Alysanne was 44 when she was born. She was also called the Winter Child because her birth coincided with the onset of winter. Fire and Blood tells us that she pretty quickly faded out of the historical record, and was thought to have died of a fever. Only decades later did the details of a suppressed scandal emerge, when it was revealed that Gael actually became pregnant during an affair, and committed suicide after having a miscarriage. You might think that this would seem like a weird tangent to focus on, but in a recent theory video by Quinn the GM, he put forward the idea that Gael might actually have been the mother of Ulf the White, one of the dragon seeds who were introduced in Season 2. In the show, he actually claims to be the child of Baelon, making him a half-brother of Daemon and Viserys. But as I mentioned in my Season 2 rewrite, this doesn't make much sense given what we know of Baelon as a character. While in the book, Ulf's parentage is never clarified. In his video, Quinn makes a pretty interesting argument that Ulf's origins would be more interesting, and probably more lore accurate, if he was actually the secret bastard child that Gael thought she lost in childbirth, spirited away on the orders of Queen Alysanne, hoping that she could cover up the scandal and save her only remaining daughter from exile, only to cause their suicide. This situation, I think, would fit more neatly within the lore and would add a satisfying payoff to an obscure mystery hinted at in Fire and Blood. Of course, like I said in my previous video though, this might be too much information to communicate to the audience for a too inconsequential character. But so far, the writers for House of the Dragon have been pretty much bowling over any kind of historical nuance from the book, so there is a chance, however remote, that they might resolve this historical mystery along the way. Of course, that's contingent on them walking back their decision to make Ulf the child of Balon, or if they have larger things planned for his character in Season 3. Okay, so these next two I actually think have a fighting chance of showing up on screen. And it's because the last two, Sarah and Vaegon, potentially outlived their father, and may have even been alive during the events of House of the Dragon. Almost every other Targaryen's death is at least mentioned in Fire and Blood. But these two seem to fade into the record after the final chapter on Jaehaerys' reign. That might be intentional. Perhaps it's done to help create the impression of a living world that doesn't have definitive records for the death of obscure characters. It could be because Sarah and Vaegon aren't canonically dead yet, and their deaths will be mentioned in Fire and Blood too. Or it could be because George R. R. Martin forgot to write an ending for these two characters. In any case, they have no involvement in the Dance of the Dragons anyway, and their inclusion in the show would be a major curveball. Well, here's how I think they could both come into play during the coming seasons. Like I said in my rewrite, I do hope we get a subplot in Seasons 3 and 4 following Viserys, the youngest child of Rhaenyra. He gets captured during the Battle of the Gullet and is thought dead by all sides, until he turns up as a hostage in Essos a few years later. Alan Velaryon pays a literal king's ransom for his release, but his reunification with his brother is a sweet moment in the otherwise depressing life of Aegon III. And like I said in my last video, I think it would make for an excellent ending to the TV show, which is how I would justify a subplot following Viserys and Essos in the first place. So what does this have to do with the children of the old king? Well, his last living daughter, Sarah, was actually exiled after a very public and very scandalous series of affairs. She ended up as a prostitute in Lys, and later the proprietor of a famous pleasure house. In the show, it's revealed that Hugh Hammer is actually one of her many bastard offspring. 3 of her other bastards, those fathered by important or noble figures from the Free Cities, actually presented their claims at the Great Council of 101, but were soundly rejected. Sarah never bothered returning to Westeros herself and presenting her own claim, boasting that she had made a kingdom of her own in the Free Cities, giving her immense wealth and widespread infamy. So it seems like her relevance to the world is pretty much done and dusted by the time of House of the Dragon, right? Well, I think there's a chance she might actually pop up in Lys after Viserys is captured. If she isn't dead, and she would only be 64 at this time, she might become tangled in a web of intrigue and plots, as Viserys is passed from one captor to another, each hoping to use him as a valuable hostage for ransom. Unlike the others, Sarah might snatch up Viserys out of a genuine affection and concern for her distant relation. Or perhaps she's just as power-hungry and cynical as the others, and she only rescues him out of personal ambition. This might explain how Viserys managed to survive the chaotic collapse of the Triarchy, as he was sheltered under Sarah's wing for all those years. Eventually, though, Viserys will fall into the hands of Lysandro Rogaire. At this time, the Rogaires are a family at the height of their power, controlling a banking network even more wealthy and powerful than the Iron Bank of Braavos. His ransom of Viserys would form part of his scheme to grab power for his family in Westeros, during the turbulent years of Aegon III's regency. Like I suggested in my rewrite video, House of the Dragon might skip the middlemen and have Rogaire take Viserys directly during the Battle of the Gullet. Or, more interestingly, I think we could see a plotline in which Sarah is involved with Rogaire, possibly even as paramour. Maybe it's her idea to return to Westeros and use her power under a new regime, using Viserys as her key to power. I could see this being an insanely interesting plotline for the later seasons of House of the Dragon, but only if they plan on ending the show when Fire and Blood does, some years after the Dance of the Dragons has already ended. If the show plans on ending things immediately after the war ends, then I don't really think this plotline would work very well. I suppose we'll just have to wait, and I think after Season 3 we might have a clearer picture of what the ultimate trajectory of the series will be. Okay, so last but not least we have Vaegon Targaryen. He was the 3rd son of Jaehaerys, but unlike his brothers, he never showed any interest in the throne, or in court politics at all. He was generally described as being a loner and an asshole to everyone around him. He seemed to have a perpetual stick up his ass, at least until his father shipped him off to become a maester, the Citadel, which he actually seemed to appreciate. After the death of Balon, he was recalled to King's Landing but refused to inherit the throne, instead suggesting that Jaehaerys hold a great council to decide the matter of succession. So this guy was actually very pivotal to events shaping out the way they did, as his decision to refuse the crown led to an entirely different order of inheritance that ultimately spiraled into civil war. If you think this all sounds awfully familiar, that's because we actually met a character named Aemon Targaryen in Game of Thrones, who basically went down the same life path, ending up as a maester on the wall. His unlikely relationship with Jon, who was unknowingly one of his last living relatives, was one of the most wholesome in the whole show, and I think there's a chance we might see something similar with Vaegon and Daeron, Alicent's third son, in House of the Dragon Season 3. Like Sarah, we're never actually told when Vaegon died, so there is a chance he could still be alive in Old Town during the events of the series. I suggested in my rewrite that when we're introducing Daeron in Season 3, he should have a strong relationship with another recognizable character. Someone at least to give him some character dynamic to play off of all season. Because, spoiler alert, Daeron will never make it to King's Landing. I thought that this role might go to Otto Hightower, but it seems like they're doing something completely original with him for Season 3. So that leaves this role open to almost anyone else. It could be Ormond Hightower, bold Jon Roxton, or possibly even Vaegon. Daeron wasn't training to be a maester in Old Town, he was just a ward of the Hightowers. But it's possible that they could have met while he was there. Of course, Vaegon is much colder and much less wholesome than Maester Aemon was. So this mentor dynamic would be a lot harsher than anything we've seen in the series so far. We could also take this subplot in a darker direction. Another Quinn the GM video, promise I'm not content stealing, suggested a connection between Vaegon and the death of dragons theory. If you don't know what that is, well, basically there's a popular internet theory based off of this line from A Dance with Dragons that speculates that the Maesters may have been responsible for driving the dragons to extinction after the war. Most adult dragons were killed, but House Targaryen still held Dragonstone and plenty of dragon eggs. Conspicuously though, every further attempt to hatch dragons either failed or produced hideously malformed and aggressive wyverns that attacked everything around them. With Vaegon, nicknamed the Dragonless, being a maester, or possibly an archmaester by this point, it's possible that he might have been involved, or even the progenitor of this plot. It's a bit of a stretch, given that Vaegon is a Targaryen, but he might have learned something in his studies at the Citadel, which would cause him to resent, or even to fear the power of dragons. Perhaps we might see him begin Season 3 as a mysterious and calculating mentor for Daeron, only to later be revealed as an independent actor that's scheming to get all the dragons and dragon riders killed. Perhaps he's a key instigator in the Caltrops plot to murder Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White, unleashing wild dragons during the Second Battle of Tumbleton. And perhaps Daeron's death during that battle wasn't so accidental after all. Okay, so that's a fun scenario, but real talk though, I don't think it's all that likely. If we were going to see Vaegon in House of the Dragon, we probably would have seen him and Daeron introduced in Season 2, before he marches from Old Town. That would also be contingent on the showrunners remembering that this heavily obscure character exists in Old Town at the same time, and making the conscious effort to include an original storyline for him that wasn't in the book. They certainly have made some major changes to the timeline of events in the show. Check out my rewrite video if you're interested in that. But I just can't see them going out on a limb like that. It would be a fun curveball for us lore nerds who are constantly looking for secret conspiracies or hidden connections just beneath the surface. But for the general audience, it would be something completely out of left field. So to end this video on a bit of an anticlimactic note, no, I don't think we'll be seeing any of Jaehaerys' children in House of the Dragon, even if it is technically possible. Okay, so that's all I have for this one. I still have one more video planned for House of the Dragon, but I'm not just slipping into a Song of Ice and Fire theory content. Promise. After that, I'll move on, and back to the Fallout content that started this channel. So, if you like what you've heard, be sure to comment or subscribe. With the channel this small, every little bit of interaction is a boost of confidence that will help me get videos out sooner. Also, make sure to check out some of my past content, and stay tuned for more.